Welcome to the Compliance Advantage podcast. This is where healthcare executives transform compliance from a burden into a strategic asset that drives both growth and peace of mind. I'm your host, Ronan, founder of Ronan Healthcare Compliance and a healthcare compliance strategist with nearly 30 years of industry experience. I'll help you stay ahead of evolving regulations while building the sustainable, compliant organization that lets you focus on high-level strategy and exceptional patient outcomes. Remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today. Welcome to the Compliance Advantage. Today we have a really special guest and a friend of mine, Paul DeMuro, who is counsel at Catton. And Paul, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about compliance and AI and things of that nature.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your many contributions to the compliance industry and your podcasts. I had the pleasure of listening to all of them except the last one because I was traveling.
Well, I'm sure you'll get to it. So Paul and I used to serve on a board together at MGMA, and that's how we really got introduced and became friends at that point in time, and really enjoyed spending time with you and really helping that group, develop in what it needs to be. Tell us a little bit more about your pathway into healthcare law, and you've been doing it for such a long time. So tell us how you got to where you're at today.
Well, when I was going to graduate from law school, I always thought I'd work for an oil company, but I wasn't able to hire on to the oil company in Texas. So I joined a law firm on the East Coast, did corporate work, and then they had me in litigation. And then I did some reimbursement and antitrust and healthcare. And I decided that healthcare was pretty complicated and rather interesting. So I thought the East was a little boring. So I moved to the West Coast where I guess compliance wasn't as big of an issue back in the 80s, but it was very fascinating. And then decided, well, maybe I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I went to business school and almost interviewed for another oil company, but this time as a management trainee. They raised my salary. The world got much more interesting in California, and I decided to stay with healthcare. So that's how I got in, just by happenstance.
It's amazing. I went to law school thinking I was going to become this great defense lawyer, healthcare defense lawyer, and then kind of tort reform hit within Texas. And then I also really worked for a little bit in a law firm and decided that is just really not what I ever want to do for the rest of my life. If I ever had to keep hours again, that would drive me crazy. And so got into compliance that way. So it sounds like a similar story of kind of changing new things outside of law. So
I find that to be true, Ross. Many of the people that have gotten into healthcare, particularly in compliance, and your guests have mentioned this in prior podcasts, it's just by happenstance. And one of the things that I appreciate the most was being a young lad and having a number of repetitive jobs. I didn't want to be in a field where it was the same thing all the time. I didn't know it'd be different, as you said, every minute, but it is, and that's very interesting.
when we talk about the compliance advantage and getting to this a little bit more, we talk about kind of leadership. And I know you've sat on a lot of boards and kind of being in different positions within healthcare. And the compliance advantage really talks about how compliance can be seen as an advantage, but it's really seen as an advantage by leaders in healthcare. And so when you think about your journey of where you've, came from to where you are today and leading kind of big teams or leading kind of initiatives that were down the road, is there kind of a mentor, a philosophy or something that taught you how to be kind of a leader in that perspective to be able to drive things forward, even as a board member?
Well, it started with having good mentors in a first job. And I think many people have had that, not only in my professional positions and other positions where people guided you, they took an interest in your career, and you and your other guests have mentioned this. And my new position at Catton, I have one of the best leaders I've ever had. So I feel that I was in part hired to mentor her because she's a lot younger and how we developed our practice. But I found myself being mentored by her also. And so I think that, and you've kind of mentioned this before, it's really a two-way street, and it depends on the culture. And I find that one of the things that's probably most important is realizing the importance of compliance. So one, you probably would ask me this question, but I thought about this a lot because every podcast we talk about how important compliance is. But this morning it struck me. I'm a certified public accountant in Maryland, and I don't hear the finance department and accounting department talking about whether or not they want to follow the accounting rules. All right. So the rules that govern compliance, which are, in my view, much more complex, it's really a matter of, it's just part of running a business. And the business, as you've said before, is focusing on patient care and the best interests of the patient. So I think it has evolved over the last 35 years I've worked in it, because originally the compliance officers were like cops. They found something that was wrong. And now what I find is the compliance officer almost has to be the person that finds the solution. So the compliance, one of the things that's good about my very background is I can draw from a lot of different areas and trying to come up with those solutions. When I got my doctorate, I realized I knew less than I thought I did. So I knew who to talk to. And those compliance officers, in my view, that I've worked with, that are the most successful, are those that think about the answer and realize they might not know the solution, but they know who to go to and who to bring in, because there are sometimes other ways of doing things.
I love this analogy, and you do have this kind of plethora of education and experience, JD and PhD in informatics, MBA and CPA, like you said. And it was really interesting that you said when you, as a CPA and dealing with the finance, and I never really thought about it this way, and I'm so glad you brought it up. You never walked in to, the controller or the CFO's office or something else and go, "Hey, today, do you think you want to follow GAP, or do you think you might not want to follow GAP principles? Like, what do you think you want to do with the financials today?" Right? And it's always, well, no, we are going to do it this way. This is how we're going to do it. We always do it this way, and this is what it is. And you're right, in the compliance realm, you do get this kind of odd perception a little bit that it is by choice what you can follow or what you can follow and how you're going to do it, right? Even some people don't put in a compliance program because they do see it as, like you said, the cop, or they see it as a hurdle, or they see it as a way to slow business or slow growth or something of that nature. And instead of saying, no, this is how we showed the advantage of the organization, right? And then this is how we see it growing, and this is how we protect our investment. So with all of those kind of backgrounds that you have, and even seeing what a CPA does, I mean, how does that change how you talk to clients about either legal issues or compliance issues? Because I think there's such a different range of people that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, one of the first things is trying to decide if you're trying to get a deal done or
Mm.
you're trying to accomplish some goal.
Yep.
So on one of your podcasts, you ask people, what would you like to know about, whether you're clairvoyant or whatever? And I would like to know, before I went in the room, if there were 12 people, what people's motivation was with respect to this specific transaction. All right. So if it's a merger of two companies, are the CEOs primarily concerned with what their compensation is going to be? All right.
Okay.
How is the board put in this? And I always, not always successfully, but I always try to involve compliance from the beginning.
Okay.
Now, sometimes I get pushback from who's going to be on the team or whatever. And I did the same thing when I was general counsel for a company. The reason is, in my view, not because they'd catch me or something, but the diversity of thought is very important. I've done this long enough to know that my task is to get to a specific goal, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And while I'm hired to do certain things, sometimes a would-be acquirer realizes in diligence that it doesn't want this company. This company, and you've said this in one of the other podcasts, isn't worth what they thought it was.
Right.
So back when there were days when we had data rooms, and we had a huge data room in a Western state, after 3 or 4 days, we realized we didn't want the company at any cost. Okay. And so while I was despondent because I'm a deal guy, the CEO turned to me and thanked me for helping facilitate them not buying a company that wouldn't work for them, because sometimes everything's not even in the documents. So you acquire a company and there are employees that don't respect compliance. And then on day one after you've acquired the company, you have a problem you didn't know you had. So I think that I try to get everybody on board and understand what their reasoning is and thoughts. Now, ultimately, sometimes you have to go to the board of directors because the board of directors may have a special committee, but I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. And I think it's amazing when we're talking about deals and architecting deals, because you're right. And I just did I just did a panel discussion on this at the transactions conference for AHLA a couple weeks ago. And a lot of this is, when do you bring in your both regulatory and your compliance diligence, right, up front, or you do it on the back end? And I really think that says a lot about kind of understanding what that compliance risks when you're doing a deal. Because if someone is doing a deal and they're like, hey, we're going to do it at the end because you know what we need to do, check that box, right? Get that done. We're going to get RWI, reps and warranties insurance. We're going to get all those things in place and have to do diligence to be able to do that, or have to do compliance diligence to do that. It's a much different kind of behavior than if it's somebody up front, like a CEO going, I want to know what I'm getting into right off the bat, right? Then I think, how do you deal with that when you have people who want to push it to the backside versus really using it as their advantage to say, can I get in it or can I get out of this deal?
Well, oddly enough, I find the most sophisticated clients that I've worked with are private equity.
Yeah.
They don't want me to come up with a 200-page diligence list initially. They have a list and we modify it based upon whether it's a hospice, hospital system, whatever kind of IT company. And there's a couple of key things they want to know up front. And if these things aren't answered to their satisfaction, they might not go through with the next phase of the deal. And this saves them a ton of money. It doesn't mean they might not find things later that are problematic, but it's very important to do this. And who is better to be on that team than people from compliance?
Right.
Because I can kick this to them and say, what issues are you seeing? So let's say it's one particular niche healthcare company, and I'm working with the Ronan healthcare consultants. I can say, Ross, what about this particular IT, EH, or whatever company? And what do you see in your compliance work across the country? And that's important. And we come up with this, what I call mini diligence list. We meet with the private equity sponsor and we say, this is a way that we might be able to save money and move it more quickly. And almost invariably, they're fine with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. A lot of our clients, 80% of come from private equity, right? And it's such an interesting way of dealing with how they protect their investments, right? How they get into deals and how they do the transactions, because they understand the risks associated with them. And, even as of lately, there's been a lot of, spotlight shown on any investors in healthcare, whether it's private equity, VC, or whatever it may be. So I really think that's a really important way of looking at it when we're doing deals.
This episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast is brought to you by Ronan Healthcare Compliance. At Ronan Healthcare Compliance, we believe in transforming healthcare compliance from a checkbox attitude to a strategic advantage. With decades of expertise, our team of consultants provides innovative solutions tailored to your organization's unique needs. We don't just help you meet your standards. We elevate your business, ensuring ethical practices are at the heart of what you do. Whether you're navigating complex regulations or seeking to enhance your compliance strategy, Ronan Healthcare Compliance is your partner in achieving excellence in healthcare compliance. Ronan Healthcare Compliance, redefining compliance, empowering leadership. Visit us at ronanhc.com to learn more. Now, back to the show.
I do want to transition. I think there's so much to talk about when it relates to kind of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And I know you do quite a bit of this across the board. And so, kind of with you see all of this AI activity going on, can be a real exposure for people in healthcare. It can be a real big compliance risks where there's some blind spots. And honestly, as you know this, you're probably going to talk about, no one really knows where we're going tomorrow. Like every day is a challenge in the AI industry. And when I sat and listened to the DOJ talk about a year ago about how they're going to go after AI, and they got to make sure compliance programs know about AI and what you can and can't do. So with it accelerating kind of across the country, what are you seeing in place that compliance or regulations need to kind of step up, or where we need to really get ahead of the game so that we do kind of create that advantage so companies can use AI to be better efficient?
Well, the first thing is that companies should have, and I talked about this last week in New York at an AI conference, companies should have AI policies and procedures, just like they have policies and procedures for many other things.
Mhm.
And who best interface with these policies and procedures than the compliance officer? So let's just give compliance more responsibility as a result of this. But these things, you hear this concept of the human in the loop.
Right.
So particularly in healthcare, where there is a lot of consideration about having AI type models, for instance, in radiology,
Mhm.
that the radiology type developments in IT can arguably read certain films better.
Right.
And so one of the questions I got at the cocktail reception, of course, I don't drink alcohol, so I was able to answer this, was, do you really think this is going to replace the physician? And I have seen something where there's a suggestion that the AI model, we'll just call it the AI model because it's unclear what it would ultimately would be what would read initially. And unless if the AI model found a problem, the doctor wouldn't get involved. And so the thought was this would save a lot more money because you wouldn't pay as much for radiologists. But growing up as a research scientist with a PhD, I realized, well, the AI model will make mistakes. So it'll miss a mass, but then that wouldn't have been seen by the physician. And of course, some of the lawyers in the room sometimes, what about the malpractice implications or who's going to be liable? And this is all true, but I'm more interested in the basic aspects of how information technology and AI models are used. And part of this should be written policies and procedures that are recalibrated all the time. And it's different for different aspects, healthcare, just like many other things are. So I think it's very exciting for compliance officers because if they were getting bored, they won't be bored for the next 6 months. Not that they weren't getting bored, but, and exciting for Ronan healthcare consultants because now you can remind people that, you should refresh this and look at that. And it's also incredibly important that everybody keeps up on the developments in every aspect of their field because it changes all the time.
I'm glad you said that, because I think, right now we get asked by our clients quite a bit. And I did sit on an AI panel late last year, and we're getting a lot of questions by our clients of saying, I think they're a little slow to the game, to be honest with you, when it comes to AI. They're like, how do we implement AI now? Like, how do we put this in place? And it's not necessarily just for care issues, with patients and PHI and things of that nature. There's a whole nother bucket over here that has to deal with, operational efficiencies and how you're going to run your business and your human resources and all the other aspects of a healthcare organization that doesn't necessarily deal with patient care. So we're getting quite a few questions from a compliance standpoint of, what can we do? What can't we do? And, you know, my first response is, we'll give you today's answer, but come back tomorrow and we'll have a conversation about what tomorrow's answer is, because everything is changing minute by minute. But what I'm seeing is a lot of changes in state regulations that are being, they're preempting obviously anything that's happening at the federal level, but they're being more, restrictive in the things that they can say you can and can't do. Colorado just came out, or they're coming out with a regulation saying that if any decision making at all in healthcare is relied upon by AI, that's a violation of this regulation. And that's a huge kind of issue there, right? Which we all don't want AI to be making medical decisions, but we also are like, at what point in time do you be able to use it, or how does it work together? Have you seen any kind of state laws that are being just overly restrictive and really putting a chokehold on what you can do from an AI perspective?
Some AI professionals would suggest that all state laws put a chokehold on AI because it stymies innovation, and that it should be up to the individual organization and their compliance program to decide what's best. And I'll use this example. You recall when the AI model started playing chess.
Yes.
Now it wins all the time. All right. You recall, I think the first 2 times it failed the MCATs. Now it passes the MCATs. So a lot of this, and as you know, these models work on a probability analysis.
Right.
So if there are bias and other problems in the data set, the data points, then that can create a problem for the analysis. And sometimes you'll see these people joking, well, I queried AI models 3 times and got 3 different answers. And although they may have been similar, another problem I think is this, which scares me as a research scientist, is hallucinations.
Yes.
So one might wonder why these models hallucinate, particularly in the legal world. You're a lawyer, so why would it cite cases that didn't exist? Why would it not be able to check to see? And some very accomplished lawyers have paid tons of money because of this. And so you, as taking your legal hat off and putting your healthcare professional hat on, you probably wonder, well, what other hallucinations might there be from an infrastructure standpoint, a business standpoint, and a clinical standpoint? And what is the scariest is what we don't know, right? And so we don't know this. So when you ask about these state laws, the state legislatures are trying to control what happens in AI in the best interest of their people in their state. The problem is they don't really know. And the
Right.
problem is that AI evolves so much. So it often creates a very difficult regulatory labyrinth for somebody who has a national company. So I turn this question back to you, Ross, as a national compliance executive, and you're trying to make sure this internet healthcare platform complies with all state laws, and you've got differing state laws that don't comply with whatever we think the federal law is, might be who might be preempted. Oftentimes, you then have to go to the lowest common denominator.
Right.
So I remember when I practiced in Florida and people said they weren't concerned about the GDPR, the European privacy laws. I said to them, well, do you have any patients that came from Europe? I know they don't come in the summer, but they come in the winter. Oh, yes. So they were subject for many of these internet things to the GDPR. But I'll leave it to the compliance professionals like yourselves that I would hopefully retain to work on that as long as I manage that overall process. So I think you're right, spot on, but it's evolving. And a lot of people feel that, until we let it learn the cat, we let it learn a chessboard. Now, the difference there is a limited number of chess moves.
Yeah.
So even if somebody makes a wacky move with a rook, there's limited enough. Now, the MCAT is a little more complicated because the questions do change. But in healthcare, there's an infinitesimal number of answers. I remember once in Florida, a physician was caught up in an OIG DOJ investigation. And, my job is to solve problems. So he said, I think this modality works. And I actually found a research study in Norway, I believe it was Norway, that supported what he was doing. Now, he still ended up in trouble, but at least there was something that supported. So sifting through all of this is really key, I think.
Yeah, we're a very AI forward company. We spend a lot of time getting educated and getting certified in different areas of what, all the LLMs are and what you can use them for. And you hear this all the time, AI is not going to replace you and all those other kind of things. And I agree with that in part because, and this is what we tell all of our clients, is that you got to be an expert, in my opinion, in the issues you're dealing with on AI, right? So if you're asking it a question, you better know more than it does before you get into it if you just need some clarification. And so the hallucinations, the bad cases, the bad advice, the wrong advice, right, that come through, in my opinion, I tell all of my staff this and all of our clients this is you got to be able to look at it and go, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Show me the case. Show me where you got this. Show me where it's at. And, if it's hallucinating, it can't produce it. Oh, yeah, you're right. I just made that up. Okay, why did you make that up? Well, you asked it in a really weird way that had made me make it up. And so there's all kinds of different conversations you can have with these LLMs, in my opinion. And so when we talk about it from a compliance perspective, it's like, don't use it to replace your brain.
Ross, you have hit on a key issue, but I think the bigger consideration is the skills gap. So
Yes.
you have, you're one of the leading compliance professionals in the world. So easy for you to say, don't go
Yes.
down this rabbit hole. Look at this, and I see this doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
And I can tell your employees love you. You have a great culture in your company, and they're attuned to this because they can go ask Ross. And if Ross doesn't know, he can go somewhere else. But I gave a talk last year at a university on the skills gap. It
Mm.
was AI in clinical research. And so one of the problems is we're asking through these models, if you give somebody an assignment or they're looking at a problem and they go to an AI model for the answer, they don't necessarily know whether this is an issue. So when I gave my talk, I had a set of bibliography or references, and somebody had asked me at some point, "Did you actually read all those articles?" Yes, I actually did. Okay, the research studies. Okay, and see, Russ, you would read them. All right.
Right.
So the problem here potentially is that while there may be a human in the loop, if this is a human that grew up just on AI and doesn't have your plethora of experience, then that could be a problem. And so we worry about in a lot of professional industries as we can become more efficient and there's less people going to the library reading things or going to the medical library in the medical field. Do we have people over time that won't be able to exercise the judgment that you have? And so that is an issue. And so how do you, I mean, your company is growing. So as it gets bigger and bigger, you might have a great culture, but you have to make sure everybody feels that they're getting that training. And how do they get that training if they're drafting a document through AI, right? Or somebody asked me today, they said, could we take these remarks, run it through this AI model and draft an article for you? I said, I'll look at it, but I don't know. So, but I don't know if that answers your question, but it seems to me that we really gonna need more of these people with this skill set rather than less.
No, I completely agree. And I think you hit a really good point, especially the younger generation who have, 1, 2, 3, 4 years experience. And now all of a sudden they're using AI and maybe getting some big jobs, making big decisions. When in reality, even you and I know this, 10 years of experience in something is just not enough to be an expert in something, right? I mean, you really have to spend a lot of time doing the whether it's deal work, whether it's law, whether it's healthcare, whatever it is, you need to have that kind of experience. And it's more than 10 years, right? It's like I've lived it, I've seen it, I've got the bruises, I've got the scars to be able to use AI in a more effective way. And even with our team and our clients, we turn around and say, okay, I get that. I get you want to use it, and I get you're getting a pretty picture and a pretty report and you're getting all that stuff, but you got to know what to ask and when to ask it. And if you're not pushing that way, you're going to get bad outcomes. And I think that's the same way in healthcare when it comes to kind of the compliance policies and procedures that people need to put into place when they're utilizing AI is you have to utilize it and there has to be a human supervision oversight of what it is because it's not always right. Just like people aren't always right, right? But experienced people can be right. Even me, I call you. I'm like, hey, Paul, I got issues here. I need to bounce it off somebody. Like, this is not feeling right for me. It's the same kind of concept in healthcare. And I think compliance really plays a big role in that on a go forward basis with AI.
Ross, you just brought something to light that I actually never thought of, and I've always learned something from you. And this is a key point that I'm really glad we're doing this, not because it's just fun to talk to you, but this thing you said. So the AI model, when it hallucinates or makes up stuff, because it wants to answer your question.
Right.
Okay. What about the younger person? It's not too different than in some settings, the younger person that, and you do an incredible job of screening employees. What the younger person wants to please Ross. So Ross wants an answer. So the younger person goes out and tries to find everything he or she thinks will support the answer to Ross. Some of it is maybe off the wall, but that's not unlike the current status of the AI models and even the large language models. So I think and I never thought about it in this context until you said what you did, but I think we have to look at it that way. And when you raise the issue about certain infrastructure in a healthcare organization, do you want that AI model that's making stuff up sometime to be the definitive answer on all of that? And then do you want some human in the loop that doesn't know either? And that's why I think these cross collaborative teams, whether it be for a deal or compliance, are key. I realize with my vast educational background that there are stakeholders in addition to the primary and secondary stakeholders,
Right.
and particularly in healthcare, and they're important. I also realize that the more I think I know, I don't really know that much. And so I want to this is why I'm such a proponent of what I'll call diversity of thought, because I see the posts you have with your team. They come from various backgrounds. You have these team meetings, and I bet you all learn stuff and you develop things by something that someone says or thinks that you never would have thought of that makes you, and also more importantly, they probably don't hallucinate. If they don't know the answer, they probably don't say anything. And you also, the team respects what they're thinking. So the model of your company should be the model of how people use and employ AI. And I'm only using that because the people that listen to your podcast know you and they see that. So we can't expect that an AI model is going to solve all of our problems. Now, it's very good where, let's say, your law firm has 5 acquisition models, asset purchase agreements. You load them in and you say, from this model, create X. But if you just go to the internet and say, oh, just come up with a form, it has nothing to do with what, and in the old days when we did this mechanically, we had form files at firms and the person would look at these documents and they'd cut and paste. That's essentially what it's doing, but then trying to draw more. And one of the problems with hallucinations is when they don't have the sites, the cases in their database to check, or they don't have the medical knowledge. I'm a member of the Fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine, and we have access to an incredible plethora of electronic publications. Well, if that thing doesn't have the access to all those publications, and then know how to deal with what they mean, that's a different thing. So I think that this is where compliance is key again. I mean, it's not a matter of whether there should be compliance. They're a necessary part of answering raising these questions. And why would a business want to have this? Because the business wants to come up with the right answer. even a private equity company where people may arguably be trying to make a lot of money, the billionaires often that run these companies do not want to have a negative story in the Wall Street Journal. And that's as big a motivation as I've heard some people have as others. So I think it's incredibly important that people realize that we are flying the plane while we're trying to fix it, given AI. And the compliance officers need to be an integral part of that.
Yeah, we could talk about AI all day long. So, but as we kind of move towards the end here and we're talking about kind of compliance at an advantage, and you deal with a lot of CEOs in healthcare, whether they're boards or, like I said, CEOs or leadership or whoever may be, this is one of the highest regulated environments, whether it's AI, it's fraud, waste, and abuse, it's, anti-kickback issues, go down the list, especially with the new kind of initiatives that are out there, like the Crush Initiative, et cetera. How do you or what do you advise CEOs or leadership when they're trying to get into kind of this? I want to be part of healthcare. Really want to step up to the plate. From a regulatory standpoint, where do you go? Where do you tell them or give them the best advice?
Well, the first thing I tell them is to listen. I think it's very important to not have the answers in your mind first. Understand the specific, particularly if you have a new board member coming to healthcare try to get a better background of healthcare. So we have, as I'm sure you do, board training programs and to bring them up to speed on various things. And then make sure they're very comfortable asking questions at any time about certain people and that they read the board packet and not on the plane to the meeting. So I think those things are important. But overall, I don't know how many luminaries finally concluded when they thought they'd be able to fix healthcare that healthcare is complicated. And it is increasingly complicated. And because it's complicated, we do have to spend the time to try to understand it. And this also involves understanding people's motivation. The difficulty in healthcare is and I just thought of this too, Ross, but if you try to compare it to an audit, a financial audit, you get a financial audit every year. You're suggesting a compliance audit, but it's not by a third party necessarily. It might be by your group, but it's not the same as a independent sort of audit. Also, there are these notions in finance and accounting about reserves for these various contingencies we might know that happens, and these things are guesstimates, and
Right.
companies make decisions on how much risk they want to assume for this because people know that. And a complicating factor in healthcare, as you know, is that you have to realize people's risk tolerance, and it can't be unreasonable. You've said this in one of your podcasts, and if you don't have any risk tolerance, you won't have any business. So I think it's important to be able to have a reasonable risk tolerance that doesn't kill the business. And sometimes that's where we get a disconnect between new CEO types and new board members in a different industry that say, oh, well, we can just do this. So I have a close friend who is a lawyer, but became the CEO of a company that sold plastic piping and stuff. But they didn't manufacture it. So he didn't have to worry about the same regulatory issues that a manufacturer of it has to worry about. So I also think that if people don't appreciate the complexity or the risks, they ought to really probably find another field, because this is a complicated field and it involves a lot of attention to detail and collaboration.
The risk tolerance, I think that's a great advice for any CEO that's in there, because with the right compliance partner, the right compliance strategic advisor with you, that could be your compliance executive or an outside company, but somebody who's a strategic partner to you should be educating you on kind of what is a high risk, kind of what is a no go, no go, and what is something that you're like, hey, you know what? I think it's defensible, but you might lose, but we can make that defensible argument, and you guys need to make a business decision on that. And I think that's really important. It's great advice to give to kind of a CEO out there in this regulatory environment that if you have the right compliance person, compliance executive, they will tell you, brown bags of money are bad. Don't ever do that. We're not doing that. That's never a consideration. I don't care what you think the risk factor is. No. Right. And then there's this other range over here that's like, hey, it's not good. It's not great, but it's defensible, and whether you want to take the risk or not. So I think it's really great advice.
I found, Ross, that the compliance officer is not always the person out of the 12 people or whatever around the room that raises, he or she is one of them. But if there are 12 people in a room and you're trying to get to some point, if somebody has a significant problem, instead of ignoring them, it's much better to try to get that person on board, and not through groupthink, but addressing what they're thinking of. And what I do is I get that person out of the room later and talk to the person and explain to them why we think this is the case, have them research it or think about it. And I tell them, I'm not going to tell everybody else that you're the problem, because maybe the decision should go the other way. And you find, I think, that you get a much better result. Or even if you recalibrate the approach becomes less suspect, because you've accounted, because everybody, the public, the regulators are going to be like that person. Somebody's going to find things from time to time.
Now, we're a healthcare company. You're in healthcare. What do you do to take care of yourself? Health is wealth. We like to always go, if you're in healthcare, you got to do something it's not about longevity. It's about, health span, not lifespan. It's about how well your health span is. What do you do to take care of yourself?
Well, the most important thing is to move and to keep moving. In all seriousness, although I do believe that concept which the Blue Zones enunciates is, about 6 years ago, I quit drinking all alcohol. I changed my diet substantially, and I started exercising more. Now, I live in a neighboring state. Right out front of my house is usually a cross-country ski path. It didn't work out. It didn't work out this year. So I like to bike. I like to say I'm not a cyclist. I have a physical therapist. But I think the big issue is moving. And then on a mental health standpoint, for years, I didn't realize that the more time you spent on something didn't mean you'd get there. The key is realizing when you can spend all the effort you want on something and you need to switch to something else, which is why I was able to get my doctorate and still be a lawyer, and why so many athletes are also good students. And this is you, Ross, okay, because they know how to switch from one thing to another. But if you don't take care of not only yourself, but let the people in your company take care of yourself, which I know you do, you won't get to live the life you want to live. And more importantly, your clients won't get the thought process that they think they're paying for. We're particularly fortunate in healthcare with healthcare clients, because if our clients don't understand this, they shouldn't really be in healthcare. So I appreciate that question you ask of all your people, and it is indeed key, but it's part of being able to be as agile as we all need to be to pivot for our jobs. And part of it is, as we get older, is not just about having money, it's being happy, making a contribution, and having, like in your case, a company where people obviously are very excited to come to work every day, whether it's virtually or whatever. And that really shows to clients. Clients like people that are working with them, that have a positive attitude. And so I commend you and the others at Ronan Healthcare Consultants for being really role models in that area.
Well, Paul, you know what? I always enjoy talking with you. We don't get to do it enough, and really appreciate you taking the time today to talk about compliance as an advantage, AI, a big piece of it, deal making. So we really appreciate your time today, and we'll do it again. I hope you'll do it again with me.
Yeah, thank you, Ross, and say hi to your lovely wife, Susan, for me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed it, please rate, review, and share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Don't forget to visit us at ronanhc.com for more resources and connect with us on social media for the latest updates. And remember, compliance pays dividends. invest today.